Hi, Russ of Aquarium Pets here. Recently I got a great topic request for a video, the cons of overfeeding isopods. So let's get right to it. There are several potential problems associated with overfeeding isopods. First, we'll talk about the issues with overfeeding, as well as how to prevent these issues from occurring. Number one, mold was mentioned in the comment, and it can be a problem in isopod enclosures. It is especially quick to grow on fruit and other wet foods, though even dry foods in the relatively moist and humid environment of an isopod enclosure can often take up enough moisture to allow mold to grow within a relatively short time. In addition to being unsightly, mold can be dangerous for isopods in some cases. For example, filamentous or very hairy, long filamented mold growth can be a death trap to isopods, especially very small ones. There are many types of mold, and though some are not particularly harmful to humans, there are types that can be, and some people are more sensitive to molds than others. Some people are highly allergic to it, for example. Mold also consumes oxygen as it grows, and though I've never seen it happen personally, it is conceivable that really rampant mold growth could use up enough oxygen to kill isopods, especially in a minimally ventilated enclosure. In addition to feeding amounts of food that can be finished within 24 hours or so, a feeding surface, such as a flat shell, a feeding dish, a cork sheet, or even a dry leaf, can help to keep foods off the substrate, which can help reduce the speed at which dry foods will mold. It probably won't do a lot for wet foods since they're already wet. Another issue that can arise from overfeeding is mite infestation. If there is an excess of resources in an isopod enclosure, an organism of one sort or another tends to show up to exploit it. And mites are one of the most common of those organisms. Some people tend to confuse the mites that show up in isopod enclosures with the mites that parasitize reptiles. Let's get that out of the way. Reptile mites don't parasitize isopods. The mites that show up in isopod enclosures are not at all likely to be reptile mites anyway. Instead, they could be grain mites, soil mites, or abatid mites. Grain mites are rotund, slow-moving mites, sort of a light brown or tannish color. They tend to show up when there's excess food in an enclosure, especially in a relatively moist enclosure. Or abatid mites are still round or oval shaped, but they are darker, move a bit faster than the grain mites, and seem to be able to handle somewhat drier conditions than grain mites. Again, they tend to be most abundant when there is an excess of food in the enclosure. Soil mites tend to move faster than either grain mites or abatid mites, and some of them are actually predators of other mites. There are soil mites that prey on springtails, but they don't seem to cause issues for the isopod population. In small numbers, most mites don't really cause issues for the isopods and may not even be noticeable. However, if there is excess food, the populations of grain mites and abatid mites can quickly rise to meet the supply and become quite a nuisance. Some mites, including grain mites, when found in large numbers, can molt into a stage called the hypopus. This stage is capable of attaching itself to other arthropods and remaining attached for long periods of time. This can cause respiration difficulties in extreme cases. Oren McMonagle discusses this in his book Isopod Zoology, but also mentions that the hypopus stage doesn't seem to occur in colonies of isopods as it does with various other invertebrates. At any rate, large numbers of mites are at best unsightly and a sign of overfeeding, and they may also cause other issues and should be avoided. Adding springtails before you add your isopods to an enclosure and maintaining healthy populations of those springtails will help, and feeding only as much as your isopods can finish within a few hours or no longer than 24 hours will also go a long way. There are other pests that can appear in isopod enclosures when you overfeed, including, but not limited to, fruit flies and phorid flies. These are not only annoying, they breed very quickly, and in my opinion are much more troublesome than the mites we discussed. Bacteria are an important part of the ecosystem in your isopod bin, of course, but not all bacteria are beneficial. Excess food is a prime target for bacteria as well, and they can grow very quickly, causing disagreeable odors, and some may even be harmful to you and or your isopods. So that's another potential issue with overfeeding. So let's talk about how to guard against overfeeding. I kind of already mentioned that you should start with small quantities of food when you're feeding your isopods. If the food is gone or nearly gone within 24 hours, you're probably not feeding too much. You might try feeding a bit more next time to see if they can finish that off within a day or so as well. If there's a lot of food left over after 24 hours, consider feeding less food next time, and remove the extra before it has a chance to mold. Keep in mind that a properly set up enclosure with plenty of decomposing leaves and wood is basically full of food for isopods. So especially a new culture of isopods in a container like that will not need to be fed supplemental food daily. Depending on your goals for the growth of the colony, you may only offer supplemental food once a week or perhaps even less often. And then as the population of isopod grows and there's less available food, you might increase that slowly. Another idea is to offer foods that are just less prone to mold. Like I mentioned, fruit tends to mold very quickly, while some veggies like sweet potato as well as dry foods tend to take a little longer in many conditions. And as I indicated, having a robust population of springtails in with your isopods really can help to take care of excess food before something less desirable steps in to do so. Another idea that can help is to start your colony of isopods with larger numbers. A 6 count really doesn't eat much. A 10 count doesn't either. A 60 count, for example, can naturally handle a bit more food from the outset. Well, Marcus Gone Wild, I hope this addresses your question, and I hope it helps the rest of you as well. Thanks for watching. I post videos every Friday with live streams on Wednesdays, all on aquarium and vivarium pets. Please feel free to share, rate, comment, and if you haven't already, and then tap the bell for all notifications so you don't miss my next video.
From the Montenegro line, due to the fact that they have the yellow and white spots, and they also appear to have a max size that is smaller than Dubrovnik. And they are absolutely gorgeous. Many times I prefer the wild type when the coloration is also bright, but these just